And welcome back to the third channel, and welcome to the second episode of the podcast that who knew was going to return from more than one episode, the Niche Podcast, where we talk about niche TV programs. Basically, we interview someone that was involved in either the main TV show itself or an iteration of the TV show, because Big Finish is a company that loves to create amazing iterations, whether or not it's direct canon or it's like around kind of as they do with Doctor Who spin-offs. Now today I'm here with a very special guest. He's very, very, very special for all kind of reasons, which we'll find out within this interview. He's best known for working on both the original Big Finish version of Survivor and Survivor Dawn. It's the lovely, it's the amazing Ken Bradley.
Hello, Tom. That's the kindest introduction I think I've ever had. You're very kind. Thank you.
And so we'll start at the very beginning. How did you get into the lovely process we all call writing?
God, how did that start? It started at drama school, actually, I suppose is the honest answer. And one of the exercises they asked us to do while we were at drama school was to write a very short play. Not even a one-act play, just I think at the time it was something like sort of 10, 15 minutes long, something like that. A very short piece. And that was probably my first introduction to dramatic writing. I'd done some sort of writing of fiction prior to that, but that was the first time I've been asked to write any drama. I quite enjoyed it and it seemed to go quite well. So I turned that, when I left drama school, I turned that into a full-length play, which we took to the Edinburgh Festival. Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and it seemed to go down reasonably well there too. So at no point in that process was I told by anybody it was so bad that I should stop. So I carried on.
Yeah, and is audio your preferred medium, or do you like all different types of medium to write for?
It's a really good question, actually. I don't. They all come with their own unique challenges, really, and not necessarily restrictions. They're just they allow you to do certain things, and they force you. They ask you in some ways to solve a problem in a different way, I suppose is the best way of saying it. I quite like audio because, obviously, at the risk of stating the obvious, there are no visuals. You can't see anything. And so there's a sort of a joke within the industry of how badly you can visualize things for listeners. And there's a piece that Timothy West wrote for radio. I can't remember what it's called now. It was called something like "Is this a gun in my left hand?" I could be wrong, but it's worth looking up because it's a running joke about how to use exposition to badly describe to an audience all the things they can't see because you're writing something that's audio only. I quite like that restriction. I quite like any sort of challenge, to be honest with you. Any sort of restriction that you need to find a workaround for, I quite enjoy. Theatre has some of those, and audio certainly does. So I sort of like to embrace those challenges on audio and find quite sort of not just interesting ways of giving audiences and listeners the visual information they need, but sort of dramatic ways of doing it, finding ways of introducing things that actually help build drama and tension throughout a play or a scene. I did it recently in one of the New Dawn episodes where somebody has to. Are we allowed spoilers, Tom? Do you mind spoilers?
We can. We're just going to warn you now. There will be.
Yeah, spoiler alert. I can't. Is there a way of me explaining it without something? Yeah, something had to happen. Something had to happen in storytelling. This is going to be the most rubbish explanation in the world because I'm going to try and explain it without giving spoilers, having just given a spoiler alert. It was quite. Somebody had to do something very specific using a very specific object, but I didn't want to. In the moment, you don't want to say, right, damn you, I'm going to pick this object up and hit you with it. So you have to find ways of introducing the object sooner than that, and it being clear enough in the writing of the moment for the listeners to understand and refer back to what you the seeds you've planted earlier on in the piece. So yeah, it's quite there are complexities, there are difficulties, there are challenges, but it's quite nice to find. I quite enjoy finding ways around those.
And you mentioned there, Dawn, which is Survivor, not the reality show that people think you're on about
Yeah,
when you mention it. Spelt,
yeah.
I think it's spelled slightly different, but I could be wrong because I'm not great at spelling. But did you have to, before you got to, when you found out you were going to work in the world of Survivor, did you have to go back and rewatch the old original, like any episode that exists from both versions, or did you just go in straight away with a fresh mind?
No, I did watch some of the very early episodes. One of the things about Survivors that's fairly well known is that it sort of went off on a bit of a tangent. Terry Nation had an original vision for it, and then later series sort of went off in a different direction. Other people took responsibility for the series, and it explored something slightly different. So I watched some early episodes to get a feel for exactly what they were doing creatively and technically, and also in story terms. Initially, it was creatively and technically because I was only directing on the first box set. I didn't start writing until the second box set. So yeah, I was looking at a few early episodes for style. Certainly, one of the interesting things and one of the big conversations we had early on about Survivors was on television. There's no music. And on television, that's fine because in a purely visual, non-verbal sequence, viewers have visuals, viewers have pictures to look at. They can see what's happening. Um, but we've got the opposite on audio. There's no vision, and sometimes you need to be able to give an impression to the audience of what's happening non-verbally, and music's very useful for that. So I had quite a lot of Nick Briggs did the music for Survivors, the audio series, and we had quite a few conversations prior to working on that first box set about how music might work within the series, because we didn't want to just go in with a if you like a sort of traditional score, because that would be jarring with regards to what fans of the TV series would be used to. So we tried to introduce music in a way that hopefully flew under the radar a little bit, and I think it seemed to, because fans of the television series I've never heard of it. I could be wrong. So please do tell me if there is somebody out there who hates what we've done musically, but I've not heard anybody say that the music was a problem for them in the audio series. So I think we sort of pitched it right.
And are you pleased that the fans of Survivor itself are happy that the audio series is as good as both the original series and the 2008 versions of Survivor?
Yeah, you do have a you do feel a responsibility. I do on everything I do for Big Finish, because so much of it, as you've said, is linked to ongoing TV series and other TV series and franchises and things. And I do often feel, particularly on the sort of on something new like Survivors, or on anniversary stories, particularly because you know they're going to be under additional scrutiny, because basically more people are probably going to listen to them than would normally listen. So yeah, I always feel a little bit of a sense of responsibility. You want to make sure that you're honouring, particularly when somebody's had a very clear vision of what they want for a series, as Terry Nation famously did with the early series of Survivors. You want to make sure that you're not letting people down. It's a different thing. It's, you know, we were doing this how many decades later, 40 years later, something like that, I think. And we were doing it for audio, which is different. So it had we had to make sure that even though we were in doing it for audio, we had to do something slightly different to what they did on TV. So we made sure that even though we were doing something slightly different, we tried to be as respectful of the original series as we possibly could.
And going slightly off topic, but why do you think that Big Finish as a company, when they do all these like new versions of a beloved thing, why do you reckon that they're so successful for to the fans that loved the original version of that particular whatever the franchise would be?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of loyalty from listeners to start with. Big Finish have been making Doctor Who for a very long time now. And the listeners have been very loyal to Big Finish and their work on Doctor Who mostly. And I think that you can't. It would be wrong for us to underestimate the importance of that. It's crucial to have loyalty from the fans. You've got to, if you don't get it right, they're going to tell you and they're not going to listen. And if they don't listen, Big Finish isn't successful as a company, and therefore it won't be able to produce more drama. So it's a cycle. You've got to get it right. So yeah, it's really important.
And with the ongoing suggestion of, particularly with Doctor Who, but it works with other things, people wanted to see some stories animated because they think that they look really good in visual as well. Is there a particular story that you've written for Survivor that would work well in like a 2D or like a 2D animation style to,
In an animated way of any range? You mean of Survivors or of anything?
well, or Survivors or anything?
Survivors particularly. Yeah, God, so much of it, to be honest with you. I think one of the things one of the things I'm really proud of, one of the things that working with Matt and other writers on Survivors, one of the things I'm really proud of that we've done is actually create quite a visual audio series. And that isn't always the case, and it doesn't always have to be the case. Audio can be quite literary as well, I suppose, for want of a better way of describing it. But it's that we've explored and experimented with some very visual sequences in Survivors, sometimes intentionally sort of pushing the envelope of what you might consider to be still clear for listeners to follow, in terms of creating a visual sequence and audio. And we're careful how we do it. We deploy it carefully, but we've really tried to be quite bold, really, in how cinematic the audio stories are. And some really have been. So yeah, there are quite a few, to be honest with you. And I think back to some of the things I did. There was one episode I remember, with apologies. I feel bad only talking about the episodes I've written when so many other writers have written so many brilliant episodes for Survivors. But just in terms of what springs to mind, there was an episode in, may have been the second box set, second or the third. It's an episode called The Hunted, and I think it was that. I may even get my episode. Tom, if you can remember and I've got this wrong, stop me and tell me. I think it was The Hunted. I think it was an episode in box set 2 in series 2. And they're towards the end of the episode, they're sort of under siege in the ruins of a town. And then one of the characters escapes and, if memory serves, jumps into a car and sort of drives off at speed to escape, and then has a car accident. And it was the whole sequence where it was, I mean, I hope it's clear, but equally it was a very it's a very high stakes situation. And in a, even on film or television, that would have been quite a sort of disorientating sequence, intentionally so, because the characters didn't know where things were coming from, what was happening, where voices were coming from, where other characters were in the scene and approaching them. It was supposed to be unsettling in that way. And so we intentionally pushed it as far as we could in terms of making it quite disorientating for the listener. So it's a very fine line you're treading between making it still clear and easy to follow as a listener of audio, but equally quite a bold visual sequence that the listener can start to create the images for. I hope we got it right in the audio, but the reason I mention all of that is because something like that springs to mind as something it would be quite interesting to see animated, purely because it was such a quite a sort of terrifying and surreal visual sequence.
And when you're working on Survivor, not just writing, but in all the aspects, do you have to make sure that the Terry Nation estate are happy with it before you go to, say, if you're writing it before you record it, but if you before you release it, do you have to make sure that the Terry Nation estate are still happy that you're keeping to what Terry Nation wanted?
Yeah, there's an approvals process at Big Finish that everything, almost everything Big Finish produce goes through. even if it's something original or a classic that's out of copyright, we have our own internal approval processes. So that would be the script editor, the producer, and then it goes to the executive producers. And then in the terms of any in terms of any licensed drama like Doctor Who or Survivors, then it goes to the estate or whoever's responsible for overseeing those licenses. So yeah, there's always an approval process of varying lengths depending on the range you're working on. So with Survivors, as much as we agree what we want to do internally and we're all happy internally, it then goes to the Terry Nation estate for their approval.
And because of so much that's been released, we can say for sure they're happy with it. But are you relieved when you get the notice back saying that they're really proud of it and they're really excited for it?
Yes, yeah, get it. It's yes, of course. Because it works on the two levels we've already talked about. It's not just approval of a story that means you can go and make it, but they're they're not comparing it, but they're making sure that what we're doing is as you say in keeping with in terms of Survivors, Terry Nation's original vision. So yeah, to get that approval is reassuring. Yeah.
And when you finish your work and it's been released and the general public are nattering about it and it being talked about in all different avenues and people
And
are
in all different ways, Tom. Yeah.
with, do you then, because you get obviously you get a complimentary copy because they're not going to expect you to buy your own work, do you listen to it back for pleasure, or do you just like run away because you're too scared?
I don't. I don't think it's because of fear. I have listened to some things back. If we pick up on a character or a story arc that was referred to in a particular episode, I might go back and have a listen to it, or at least listen to the bit I need to listen to, if not the whole thing. There are a couple of reasons why I don't. The first is by the time it's released, I've listened to it a lot.
Yeah.
I've listened to it recorded. I've listened to dialogue edits, sound effects edits, music edits, and I've gone through it in detail, in fine detail. When you do a sound effects, when you listen to a sound effects edit as a director, if it's an hour-long piece of drama, it doesn't take you an hour to listen to a sound effects edit and give your notes, because you're stopping and starting and re-listening and working your way through. And if there's something that you think you do need to give a note on, you're going to listen to it a couple of times to work out exactly how to phrase the note, so that you're not wasting the sound designer's time. So there's a by the time it's released, I've listened to it forensically. So at least initially, I've no interest in listening to it again. I may do for the reasons I've explained if I need to later on. But the other reason I don't really, to be honest with you, is I'm very lucky. I'm very fortunate as a writer and director to write and direct as much as I do. When I first started in the business, I thought if I was to work in theatre and I got maybe 2 or 3 plays a year, that would be good, incredibly good. 1 play a year. Some directors only work, if you're working at a very high level and you're getting paid very well, you may only do a play every couple of years or something. So to get to make as much as I do for Big Finish is amazing. You only get better at a job by doing it. So the opportunity to direct the number of plays I do and write the number of plays I do for Big Finish has been amazing experience, and to be paid to do it as well is just it's a dream. So I'm very, very fortunate to get to write and direct as much as I do. The downside to that is in any given year, I listen to quite a lot of audio. So if I then have a moment to do something else, I'm not going to pop headphones on and listen to something I've already worked on. I'll listen to something somebody else has been making, or I'll go and watch a film or a piece of television. It's a lot. And on a busy year at Big Finish, it's been 70 hours of drama, so 71-hour plays in a year. It's not quite as busy as that now, and probably I was averaging sort of 50, 55. It might be a bit less than that now. I haven't done an add up for a while, but around the sort of 60th anniversary, Big Finish was really busy, so we were just doing massive amounts of drama. And that's a lot of listening. If I'm listening to if you think I'm doing dialogue edits, sound effects, so we don't do dialogue edits all the time now because we're working, so we're sort of all used to the process and we all know what we're doing. So the sound designers often leap into sound effects edits now, and that's my first listen. But if you think, even if you were to say it takes me conservatively, it takes me 2 hours to listen to a 1 hour edit in sound effects, plus another hour to listen to it on the during the music edit, which is basically my approval listen. That's 3 hours for 1 hour of drama. So, and that's conservative. It's probably a bit more than that. Some days it can be a lot more than that. So you know, I'm like this. I've got headphones on, listening to drama day in, day out. So that's a very long-winded way of saying, Tom, no, I don't listen to it.
Yeah. And you mentioned there about you directing audio. Now, when you direct in audio, is that more trickier than if you were to direct what people were doing on the screen if you were directing for TV, or is it more easier because you're only trying to listen out for the way they read the lines out?
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably easy sounds easy sounds an unfair word to use, because I worry I feel it is, but I don't want to be disparaging of all those other audio directors out there who work incredibly hard. It is a tricky job, actually. There's one reason why okay, I'll say this: audio I think is simpler than most others because you're only worrying about the audio. You only have to consider what's being recorded, and make sure that everything you need recorded is recorded. You're not having to worry about lighting, sound, in other ways, staging, cameras, if you're filming on location, everything that's going on in the world that you don't want to be going on in the world because you're trying to film a scene. That there's much less to do and to concentrate on in audio than there are in any other forms of directing. So it's much more straightforward in that sense. It's very tricky in that you're working very quickly and very incisively, on one aspect of performance, which is voice. And whereas I mean, Big Finish works very quickly anyway, even compared to a lot of other audio drama, or particularly radio drama. The BBC take much more time over recording a radio play than we do an audio play. And so what that means is we record a 1 hour story in a day.
Yeah.
And so what you've got to do is be very highly focused for a very long period of time. For an audio drama director, there's very little downtime. You're not sort of sitting back and I mean, there's lunch, that's about it. But apart from that, you're at the control desk all day or in the studio, depending on how you direct. And you're working with the actors, and with multiple actors, and all actors work in different ways as well and respond to different notes and cues. And you're trying to make sure that in as concise a way as possible, you get all your notes across to the cast and the recording engineers, so that you get everything recorded that needs to be recorded. And that's not that in itself isn't easy. It's a bit like spinning plates. You don't get a break. It can be some recording days can be quite physically exhausting because you're literally sort of on it and concentrating through quite a complicated play, for quite a long period of time. So yeah, it has its challenges, but that said, there's a lot less to have to think about than if you were working in theatre, film, or TV. And the amount of time you have to work on the story, as a result of that, you've on a play, you'd get weeks in a rehearsal room to rehearse one play. So you might get, these days they try and do things as quickly as possible, but even as a minimum, you might get 2 weeks to record a 2 hour play. Well, we would get 2 days to record that. So that's how much more quickly we're doing it. And of course, a feature film, 2 hour feature film, they'll take months to film it. So and I'm not saying they're not hard work because of that. I just mean there are lots of very different parameters at play across different storytelling mediums.
And when you've done all this hard work and all of it's come out and everyone's enjoyed it, was it sort of a relief when you found out that you'd been shortlisted for a BBC Audio Drama Award?
Yeah, it is nice. Yeah. The awards I think are always important. Awards are particularly for people at the either at the beginning of their career or like me, who are sort of fly under the radar a bit. So any kind of recognition that an award can give you is really useful. Um, and the other thing about audio is you get very little other feedback. It's unusual in audio is unusual in that it's for the listener an almost entirely solitary experience. You don't with theatre. You can, in previews for a play up until opening night, you're in a theatre with hopefully lots of other people giving you direct feedback on your play. Are they laughing? Are they gasping? Are they applauding at the end? Are they walking out mumbling, "My God, what was that? It was terrible." So you're getting direct feedback in theatre, and same with film. There are previews, and they're in cinemas, so you get a good amount of feedback. TV, it's high profile enough. It's a collective experience in terms of audiences again. So people talk about it in when they get into work. Often, you get a lot of you can get a lot of sort of social media traction behind what's happening on TV. People like to discuss what's happening on TV on social media. So you're getting a lot of direct feedback from audiences in film, theatre, and television, which you don't get on audio. You kind of have to seek it out a little bit more. Audios don't get reviewed as much as other forms of drama, so reviews are few and far between. Finding out what audiences think, what listeners think, is harder. And so, yeah, it's I find it really useful to it's not it's honestly, it's of course it's lovely to be nominated for an award, but it's also really useful because when you work in a vacuum as we do, it's quite nice to get that little sort of pat on the shoulder that says, yeah, that one was quite good.
And you mentioned there about people reviewing them, and I've noticed over the last few years, with the rise of anyone could do a podcast, a lot of people are now doing non-Doctor Who Big Finish podcasts, such as I think it's called the Big Finish Car Park podcast,
Okay,
where they
this,
talk
this is a
about
new one on me. All right.
where they talk about Big Finish, but
Yeah.
the main area of conversation is who's been in that famous car park
Yeah.
because even though it wasn't featured on Steph Pack Lunch in the Car Park Awards, it's these friends. Some of them are from Britain, some of them are from America, so it's an international podcast. And these podcasts are reviewing them, and with the amount of like people now getting into Big Fish reviewing them,
Yeah.
does that fill you with the confidence that series like Survivor will become even more popular than they already are with like non-fans of the TV show?
Yeah, I mean, that would be lovely. I really don't know. It's such a dark art. Trying to find traction for audio, for non-broadcast audio, is really tricky. We know there are listeners out there for it. The one of the difficulties is there's a lot of free to listen to audio drama in the podcast world. So trying to find audiences for things is in non-broadcast is really tricky. So everything helps. So God, yeah, I mean, if anything like that helps to shine a little spotlight on some of the smaller things we're doing, then yeah, I'd be very excited about that. The one good thing about audio, I think, that versus well, traditionally versus any other medium, I mean, it's always possible with film to sort of rent a DVD, or before everything moved on to streaming. With film, you could rent a DVD. TV was harder to see on repeat. You'd rely on it coming up on TV at some point. And I'm going back a good sort of 15 years now, probably in making this sort of frame of reference. But of course, Big Finish has been going a lot longer than that. So what we have found with Big Finish is that, of course, audio is always available, and much more so even than radio. The problem the BBC have had is so much of the drama they broadcast has just been lost. But Big Finish audio is always available, and that's the brilliant thing about it. I know it's the same now with film and TV with streaming services, but it's always been the case with with audio, with non-broadcast audio. So yeah, I kind of hope that even though we've been working on Survivors for, I think it is almost 10 years, isn't it? It's more. I think it might be more than 10. I
It's
can't remember. I'm gonna have to double check that. I can't remember. No, it might be just less. It might be 9 years, something like that. So it's quite a lot of drama over a long period of time, and it's it's found its audience, which has been great. But it would be lovely to think that in a few more years' time, even though we're not doing any more Survivors, it'd be nice. It's always there, so it'd be nice to think that yeah, in a few years' time, it's still finding its audience.
and you mentioned there about streaming. It's what's good about audio, and I know it comes from me being the world's. I've got like 2 rooms full of DVDs, and because they are quite big. It's not like you. Well, I've got a lot, but the box sets are quite big, so
Yeah,
it's not like I'm hoarding them. I'm not. I've got VHSs as well. I'm not hoarding them either. Because I have a VHS player. And but with streaming, you can, because what we've seen in America, they're removing the shows that are hard for the creators and the viewers to watch, and that's what's good about Big Finish is that even if, say, for instance, an audio that you want to listen to on CD is no longer available, it will be available on the other retailers because they're making sure that it's available elsewhere. And is that another good reason why Big Finish and other small companies that have the same regime as Big Finish are going to be around for longer than you and me?
yeah. I mean, even if CD eventually completely dies as a format, um, which it sort of is, but it's hanging on, and who knows, it might have a revival like vinyl has. Um, but I think even if sort of physical copies of things are no longer listened to, the great thing about what we do now and the great thing about streaming now is it's always available. You can always download it. You can always listen to it. There'll always be I think there will always be. I like to think there would always be some sort of app or service that would make audio accessible to somebody with a very simple piece of equipment to listen to it on.
And cassettes are coming back in as well.
Yeah, yeah,
They're the next thing. So once everyone's had the fun with cassettes, then they'll realise that CDs are quite good, and
yeah.
CDs will come back because I do think that because Big Finish used to be on cassette before CDs, and the re-releasing the vinyls, which you can
Yeah.
sort of see in the background that I've got some of them in a stack because they don't stand up because it's a very small wall roof even. Do you reckon that Big Finish will end up re-releasing nearly everything on cassette?
I've no idea. Who knows? If cassette became, for whatever reason, the only format, then yeah, I'm sure they would. Yeah. I'd quite like to listen to something I've done on cassette actually. I grew up with cassette, so it'd be quite nice to sort of um listen back to something with that sort of lovely um hiss and warmth, that
Yeah,
clunky hiss and warmth behind it.
yeah. And why do you reckon that Survivor in itself has still become this like well popular thing, even though the it hadn't been seen on TV. I can't remember where it ended because they did a revival in 2008, so I don't know when that ended. But since it last varied onto TV, why do you reckon that people are still buying it now and listening to it now and talking
Yeah.
about it?
Well, it's quality television really at the time, wasn't it? And I think also it didn't outstay its welcome at the time because it changed direction and then finished fairly quickly after that. Um, there was probably still a bit of a hunger for it. It's cult TV, it's classic British TV and cult TV. Um, it's Terry Nation. You can't underestimate that. He's got such a huge cult following and such an enormous fan base. Um, and then with Survivors, particularly, it's when we look at what happened in 2020, it was just massively ahead of its time, wasn't it? We didn't even know working on it when we for all the years we were prior to that at Big Finish, just how prescient it was. And then you look at that, you watch that original title sequence on TV. It's incredible, really. And I think that I don't know that. Obviously, we didn't know that was going to happen. So it was popular prior to that happening. But I certainly think that probably had something to do with its renewed popularity and the new dawn happening.
Yeah.
Um, as it did when we thought we weren't going to be doing any more Survivors.
And what was and how come Survivors? Did Survivors come to an end naturally, or was it a decision within Big Finish to say, "Oh, we've done enough now. Let's try and get a license to another popular TV program"?
Well, I can't comment as to what um, whether there was anything else they might be considering to replace it, because I don't get involved in those sorts of conversations at Big Finish. They're way above my pay grade. So I think they know what people are listening to at Big Finish, and I think they know when they think in story terms something might have sort of reached a sensible place. I had a conversation with Roland briefly, Roland Moore, who's written quite a few brilliant episodes of Survivors. And I was having a conversation with him about it last year briefly, and we were saying it's we've thrown a lot at these characters, and quite a lot, and it can be quite tricky to think what else you might do to them. So sometimes a sort of break is quite useful, just to sort of recharge your batteries a bit and think what you might do to characters next. I'm not suggesting Survivors is coming back. As far as I've been told, that's it. We're not doing any more Survivors. But often breaks like that can be quite useful just from that point of view. With regards to what Big Finish are planning and may not be doing, as I say, sadly, I have absolutely no idea, and I'm not party to that. I just get the call that they're going to be doing something, and the call that they've decided to stop doing something.
And because Big Fish do so much, and they've got so much back catalogue that they have to get licensing back to, I think when you want to end a franchise, it's a good place to end it, so that you can then say, "Oh, we've got this old thing that we want to re-release, or we want to edit," like they did with Robin Hood. They licensed the BBC version, but then it lost it, and then they brought it back, as in like let you rebuy the one that they'd already made. So I think
Yeah,
you give something a break, it gives them time to overthink what they've done in the past to see what was working. And
yeah.
when these things come out, do the Big Finish like what most streaming service do, not Netflix because they've only just done it. Do you get to see a like figures of how many listeners the box that you've worked on is getting, or do they keep it under lock and key so that it doesn't?
They, yeah, it's kept under lock and key. I don't at all. I get a feel for what's popular, because if something's popular, we'll make a lot more of it. Um, but no, really, I don't. I'm not, again, way above my pay grade. I unfortunately can't give you any info there. I can't give you any insight, Tom. I don't. They don't share that information with me. No.
And because social media is a big thing, do you use will you still see if people listen, you'll see it on social media, won't you? That the people that it's made for have enjoyed it, and they want to let you or anyone else or the rest of the world know that there's these fantastic audios available for very cheap prices.
Yeah, it's we do and we don't. I mean, social media is a tricky one at the moment, because it's all fractured massively because of what's happened with Twitter. So it's sort of harder really to keep tabs on what's going on, and what people are sort of discussing. And I've noticed I'm on I'm still on Twitter. I don't use it now. I just pop back every now and then, but my account's still there, but I don't really use it. I'm more active on Threads. I also use Blue Sky, so I'm sort of paying attention to what's happening on Blue Sky. Also got a Mastodon account, but don't really use that one at all, because nothing was happening there. So the reason I say that is I'm across all the sorts of platforms. I don't do Facebook. It's the only one I don't do anything on at all. But I do have an account. I just don't use it. But so I kind of pay attention to what's going on all the platforms, and because it's fractured so much in that way, it's difficult for anything to get any kind of traction. So whereas when back in the day, when it was just Twitter and everybody was actively and enthusiastically using Twitter, I'd very quickly pick up on the popularity of something, and also if people didn't like something, they're often very quick to say on social media if they don't like it. So we'd be able to, I'd be able to keep up very quickly with what was going on and what people thought. I'm finding that much harder now. So just and really just within the last sort of 6 to 12 months. So it's I don't know whether I don't know whether everybody's just stopped using social media because of it, or whether it's just too fractured now. So there aren't enough users on any particular platform for things to start to sort of gain momentum. But I'm finding it much harder to find feedback on things now. Back when we started doing Survivors, I've noticed this particularly with Survivors and the latest releases. Back when we first started doing Survivors, we would regularly get half a dozen reviews
Yeah,
for a Survivors release, across things now that don't seem to exist, like Starburst magazine. I don't think Starburst magazine exists anymore. Cult Box used to review; they don't seem to anymore. I may not be allowed to name publications like this, so with apologies if I shouldn't be. Sci-Fi Bulletin has always been brilliant and a huge supporter and voice for audio drama and for Big Finish, and I'm really grateful to them for their coverage, because it's been consistent and they still do it, which is fantastic. But I have noticed a lot of other things tail off. So the latest Survivors that I know of, there were only 2 reviews. Sci-Fi Bulletin, who were brilliant and came out really quickly with theirs, and then there's a website, I forget the name of now, but a website about Survivors, the TV series. Um, I'm really sorry for forgetting the title of it, because I should give them a shout out, because they wrote a really lovely review. Could you find out what it was, Tom, and flash it up on the screen so everybody knows? I'll send you an email afterwards. There's a brilliant website about Survivors, which is encyclopedic in its knowledge and it's
is it called is it called Survivors Wiki?
no,
So that fandom website that they have one for nearly everyone. They have
is
like
there?
everyone for Doctor
Okay,
Who, one for Casualty, and it's like in detail because it's one. It's normally one person sat
oh
like
right,
in a basement doing this and writing every single piece of detail about certain characters.
yeah. It's not just a wiki like that. I think it's called World. It might be Survivors Worlds Apart or Worlds Away or something. I'll find out. I'll email you, and please bung it up as a super so everybody knows, because it's a brilliant website and it's been really supportive of the audio series. Um, but that's the only 2 we've had for the latest box sets of Survivors. So I've noticed it. I've noticed it's harder to find feedback online.
And with the release of this interview, everyone that's watching it, please listen to Survivor. Please give feedback on audio, not just when you're listening to Radio 4 and you want to argue with the other end of the Radio Times, which is comical because it's only the last 3 pages that's about radio, even though they're called Radio
The
Times,
radio sounds.
Television Times. So please just review audio so then
Yeah, too.
all audio creative
Yeah.
know
It,
that
it
the product is rubbish or brilliant.
absolutely. It means an enormous amount to us if we see somebody say they've listened to something and they've loved it, because it's very hard to find feedback. So yeah, please do. And if you've loved something and you think it deserves more listeners, just share it. It's amazing how easy it is to start gaining some traction on social media. It just needs one person to say they've enjoyed something.
I do know that there's a I can't remember the name of the YouTube channel because I've never been able to work out how you pronounce it because it's 3 words merged into one, like no spaces because that's how YouTube usernames work. Well, they do if you want to be if you want to cheat and add more letters, and they do a weekly. I know it's Doctor Who related, but they do weekly reviews of Big Finish work and of the latest one, and some of the people that watch it and I am annoyed that I can't think of his last name, but the person that plays the current First Doctor, not David Bradley, the other one, Stephen, and I can't think of his last
Oh
name.
yeah, Stephen Noonan.
Noonan, that's it. He watches these things and now he's appearing on them.
Right.
I do think that there is a because of the love of Doctor. Who, I do think I like myself because when I found out the Big Finish, all the audios that were buying previously were from Big Finish, and I know how to buy stuff on the Big Finish website, and I'm nearly giving half my money, half my life savings. I've got a whole
Sorry, I can only apologise, Tom.
and when I found out there was other stuff, and because I'm a massive fan of like TV in general, not just Doctor Who, I do think that it's an incredible website. More people need to find these things. So like Time Slip is another incredible box
Mm.
set and all these. So I do think that reviews are slowly coming back, but I do think like Doctor Who fan need to push the Big Finish to do other stuff as well.
Yeah, it's just finding it's I'm always fascinated by the Venn diagram of life and you know sort of who does what and where there's overlap. And as I say, Big Finish is has a fantastic loyal audience, which is terrific. But it's the only way we can gain traction for other things outside of that, is to try to find listeners outside of if you like, the Big Finish bubble. And so sharing things on social media is a really important way of doing that. Survivor certainly is a great one that we'd love to find more of an audience for, because we know it's a very popular classic cult piece of television. So it's got to have they remade it in 2008, whenever it was, on the BBC. So rebooted it. So we know it's got an audience out there. So it'd be lovely to sort of tap into that audience a little bit more. And the other one is Sherlock Holmes as well. We know Sherlock Holmes has a huge international audience. So it's just finding out how to sort of how to tap them on, how to tap those Sherlock Holmes fans on the shoulder that don't necessarily listen to audio drama but would love to.
And now I think it's some version of Sherlock's now in public domain as well. So I think that when that came out, and there's a lot of versions. So I think that with these audios, and what's good is that Radio 4 Extra, they've been pushing, like they did Dan Dare not so long ago. So I think if we try and get Survivor somehow on Radio 4 Extra before it gets shut down, then that would help, because they've put a lot of Doctor Who on there
Yeah.
because of not everyone can afford Big Finish. So if they've ways of listening to it, that would be perfect. So if the BBC are watching, put Survivor on Radio 4 Extra.
Please. And so many other things that Big Finish produce that would be, I think, good for 4 Extra. Absolutely. It could be there's a huge opportunity, huge untapped opportunity there for getting a lot of what Big Finish produced onto 4 Extra and finding new listeners because of that. Yeah, absolutely. You're right.
And now that Survivor has come to a stop for now, whether or not it'll return in the future or whatever, um, if you're allowed to say, have you got any future projects in at Big Finish? Are you allowed to talk about in other franchises, or is it all just under lock and you're gonna get punched in the face by someone if you say anything?
Yeah, I'd hesitate to say they'd get violent with me, but they might. But yeah, unfortunately, so much as I'd love to share some info with you, I'm not allowed. The sort of announcements and release schedule is very tightly choreographed at Big Finish, so they wouldn't thank me for letting you know what I might be working on. Can I say there are things? Yeah, I mean there are some things. Yeah, of course there are. We're particularly when we lose something like Survivors, we might think, well, that's production capacity that just in terms of sort of time, the time we've all got that we could be using to work on something new. So we often talk about what we might want to do, but the decision making process is way above my pay grade. There are, you know, it's Nick Briggs and Jason Haig-Ellery and others at Big Finish and John Ainsworth who are the only people party to those sorts of conversations and decisions. And often there are some things I do know about because I might be asked if I have any ideas of how it might work. But there'll be loads of stuff that I know absolutely nothing about.
Yeah, because if you leaked anything, this is a very topical reference. You'll probably get something hurtling into your face, like Russell T Davies when he chucked Yorkshire tea back in Stefan's face.
Right.
That clip's been going around because obviously Russell T Davies was on. I think it's I can't remember the. Imagine that's it, and he showed the massive Tetley tea bags, and then Stefan decided the Stefan that's the host of Unleashed mentioned that they had an argument about Yorkshire tea, so he brought him a box of Yorkshire tea, and then filmed as Russell threw the Yorkshire tea back in his face. So now there's just footage of Russell with Yorkshire tea. People are now removing Yorkshire tea and putting a selection of things that they don't like.
I was going to say that's got to become a meme, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and I think because it's like Big Finish, because Big Finish and Doctor are linked, I think the secretiveness works in his favour because then if you hear like a rumour, you can get excited and then Big Fish know that that rumour is something that people want. If the rumour's incorrect, they'll know that there's something that they want. A Big Fish go,
Yeah,
we might have a look into that. And
yeah.
do you reckon that keeping everything under wraps is more beneficial and not telling anyone about anything until the announcement is more beneficial to help build up excitement for it, or do you reckon that just like stops it from being as exciting as it is?
It is. These are sadly. This is a. You're talking about skills that I don't have, sort of marketing and sort of the 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 PR side of sort of planning and releasing something is that's sort of way beyond any sort of skill or experience I have. So they do it the way they do it for very good reason.
Yeah,
And of course it's all linked with, because Big Finish is a commercial production company and it needs to sell plays to listeners. So it's all based on how they know they get the sort of best response from listeners with regards to how they announce and release things. So announcements and releases are very important and very tightly choreographed for that reason. Whether it will always be done in the same way, I don't know, because as I say, social media's sort of fractured quite dramatically just in the last few months. So it may be that that Big Finish find new ways of handling announcements. I don't know.
yeah. And I think the one thing that Big Fish could do, because of Nicholas Briggs being a very well known face in society in general, not just in the world of Big Finish because he's
Hmm.
appeared. They should try and get these announcements to the either BBC Breakfast or something on ITV. If it's relevant to one of their channels, I reckon they should try and get it like they do with like say Gladiators. They had two of the Gladiators on talking about whatever. I think, and they did it with Steve Coogan talking about his Alan Partridge podcast. I think we need the a little bit more up there with promoting, not just sending it out online and going, ooh, because like a lot of people were excited for the Dabs Army stuff they've just recently released.
Hmm.
So I think having that on the news would start conversations about it. I think that's what Big Finish. That's the next step. I think Big Finish.
Yeah. Yeah. And often I think sometimes there are moments where Big Finish is mentioned in quite a sort of high profile place on television or on the radio. But there's not quite, unfortunately, because there's a sort of, they're not necessarily there to talk about Big Finish. It gets mentioned in passing and doesn't necessarily, which is great, which is lovely, but there's not necessarily an explanation of what Big Finish is attached to that. So it doesn't necessarily sort of land in quite the way it could. Because it doesn't necessarily explain to listeners or viewers what Big Finish are doing. So yeah, it would be wonderful, but I mean that's the holy grail, Tom. That they're chasing for that all the time in it, and using every weapon in their arsenal to do it, I'm sure.
And when you're writing, when you sat down with either your pen or your paper or your keyboard, what sort of method do you use for writing? So I know that Chris Chapman, for instance, listens to soundtracks to get him in the mood for writing.
Yeah.
Whenever there's like a specific film soundtrack that's relevant to the area that he's writing. What method do you use when you're writing your like first draft script?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. When I'm writing scripts, I don't listen to anything. I'm envious of writers who can listen to music or something specific like that to help get them in the zone for writing. I can't. I find that too distracting. Um, I actually discovered, there are sort of two answers to this question really. There's the sort of early stages in terms of coming up with ideas and outlines and things, and what do I use to sort of give me inspiration at that stage, which is when I'm really constructing the story. And then there's the sort of act of writing itself, which is a very secondary process for me. I do a lot of planning,
Yeah,
which Big Finish require, but it's also happens to be my process. So I plan a lot. Um, and then when I'm writing, I know what I'm writing. So there's sort of two distinct stages for me. Early stages when I'm coming up with ideas. Um, I kind of just listen to everything that's going on in the world around me. I listen to news and current affairs quite a lot. There's a lot happening in the world at the moment, and I find a lot of it very useful and can inform a lot of what I need to do in terms of story, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years. So news and current affairs is really useful to me. I watch a lot of factual programming, um, just to help me unlock ideas, story ideas. When I'm writing, that was I kind of need to concentrate when I'm writing. I can get very easily distracted. I'm one of those people who can get very easily distracted. So I need to find a way to actually completely sort of shut down from any sort of external influence. And I've discovered by accident a few years ago, I was writing something for Big Finish, and my partner's an artist, a painter, and she often has to go to quite large art fairs, and sometimes needs a hand just sort of unloading the car with equipment and loading the car back up at the end of the day. She needed to go to one art fair in particular, needed a hand, but I was on a deadline for writing, so I said, well, it's no problem. I'll just sit at the back, and there are always sort of places you can hide in big art fairs and exhibitions. I said, I'll just find a place at the back somewhere and just sit on my laptop and write. And I'll either be able to write or I won't. If I can't, it doesn't matter. I'll lose a day, and I'll sort of pick up on it the next day. What I found was actually I was more productive in that day than I'd ever been before. And it was a really busy art fair with a lot of background noise. And I realized that actually there was so much background noise that it just became like a sort of a wall of noise, like white noise, just a sort of wall of sound. So there was nothing in it that was so consistent that it became distracting, like any sort of rhythm or lyric or regular ticking or anything that would normally cut through. It was just a completely random wall of sound. And so now what I do when I'm writing and I need to concentrate, if I'm just in a room on my own and it's quiet, that's perfect for me. I'm happy. Often because I talk out loud while I'm writing, I'll sort of have the conversations. And so anything else going on, I just find a bit distracting. But now what I do on the off the back of that experience of finding that I was really productive with all of that background noise going on, I've got a couple of these apps that you can use and dial in different types of noise, from white noise and static and basic ticking. And what I do is I chuck in busy coffee shop, roaring fire, storm outside, so wind, rain, distant thunder, traffic going by the window, just lots and lots of noise. And that works for me every time. I just pop these headphones on, play that noise, that constant sort of drone of background noise, and I can just completely concentrate on what I'm writing. So that's my bizarre way of being able to focus. But I am very envious of people who can listen to music and do it. I'd love to be able to do that. I
And
just can't.
and you mentioned there about writing on your laptop. Now, this might be a very in detail question that will alienate 50% of the audience.
Go for it.
What? Because I
Don't go.
do a lot of writing myself. What software do you use to write your scripts?
That's a good question. Big Finish has a particularly unique format for its plays, page formatting for its plays, which is much like just standard stage play format used to be. But it's not an easy one to find a template for in most of the popular screenwriting applications or writing applications. So I just use I use a notes app to dump all my random thoughts and ideas. So that's always on the go. I'll even use it to cut and paste bits of dialogue that I've written that I decide not to use. Rather than delete them, I'll chuck them into a bin in notes, so I can always go back and find them if I need them. So I've always got a notes application on the go, and I might have 2 or 3 notes associated with one piece of writing. I might get it might be my ideas, might be one note. random bits of dialogue might be another note, and feedback from script editors and producers might be another note. I tend to just use a normal word processing application for Big Finish for all my scripts. I use a Mac, so I use Pages because it's free or very cheap on a Mac, and I can just format it to do exactly what I want to do for a Big Finish script. And so I'd say it's split at Big Finish between people who use Pages on a Mac and those who use Word on a PC. But you can save in either format. So when we're sending documents about, it's very easy to read in different formats. And often when I send a script out for people to read, I'll send it as a Pages document, a Word document, and a PDF. So they've got three options as to how they might choose to read it and give me notes. So that's and when I supply a final draft, I do the same. It's as a Pages document, a Word document, and a PDF. But then for other things, I use other applications. I found a brilliant screenwriting application called Highland, which I love because it does template for other things apart from just screenplays. But what I really liked about it was it knows John August, the chap who developed it, has sort of created a really writer-friendly interface whereby if you write a name in capitals, it knows that what you're going to write is, and you hit carriage return, it knows that what you're going to write next is dialogue, so it automatically formats it as dialogue. And it's brilliant. It just takes, what I love about writing in Highland is it takes all the, you don't have to think about formatting. I'm always formatting scripts for Big Finish. It doesn't take forever, but I'm always having to do it. But when you write a screenplay in Highland, you don't even have to think about it. It just does it all for you. It's magic. It's just a brilliant experience. I don't use Final Draft very much because I've never had to in my career so far. But I would if the people I were writing with required Final Draft. It's quite good. It's quite quick. It does most of the things. It does a lot of the things Highland does. It sort of auto formats a lot. It's much like Highland. It's a lot of these writing applications are very good in the feedback they can give you. So they can tell you how many male characters you've got versus female characters, how many lines of dialogue particular characters have. And that's not even scratching the surface of the feedback they can give you. It can be really useful. Final Draft is brilliant because it will do a whole scene breakdown for you and virtually schedule your production. So there are good reasons for using different tools depending on who you're working with and what you're writing. But that's my process, really. I try to keep it as simple as possible.
Well, I only recently started. Well, it was like 30. I started using Final Draft 12, 30 days before Final Draft 13 came out. So I got Final Draft 13 for free because they noticed I'd only just purchased Final Draft 12.
Well, that's all right. Yeah, that's cool. At least they did that. That's fair.
It annoyed me for a little bit because I knew the Final Draft 13 was coming because I saw that they were preparing for it in the comic, but I didn't know how far soon. I didn't realize that soon. But I think Final Draft, personally, for me, works really well because I quite like it. The only bit I'm annoyed with is that when you're looking at the templates to try and make sure you're getting the correct format, on Writer's Duel, which is another one I used to use, that had a particular format for radio. I write a few things for my university radio station because you can do whatever you want, so I literally do whatever I want. They don't argue with me. But on Final Draft, you'll have a podcast section. You'll have a template for podcast, which isn't the format that you see on the writers on the script library on the BBC website, which is the only bit of Final Draft that annoys me.
Yeah, and I think you can create a template, can't you? But it's you've got to go through the process of sort of working out how to do that, working out how to set it up in the first place, which I think can be a bit trickier.
And
that's the reason I don't use those applications, because they don't very easily give me the sort of basic stage play format, which is what Big Finish use.
Yeah. And so coming towards the end of this amazing yet glorious, still thinking of better adjectives.
Are you still there, everybody? Are you still there?
Better adjectives than the word excellent. And this is the point in the interview where people have learned a lot about you, and people now are in awe of you. What advice can you give them for particularly writing in general, not just in audio format?
Writing any sort of fiction or
Yeah,
drama
just where any
or anything at all. And
any
actually, it equates to anything at all. You've just got to do it. And I know it's horrible, and I've heard people give this advice before, and I've sort of gone away wondering whether it's the right sort of advice. But over the years and in my experience, I've come to realize that it is. You've just got to keep writing. You just have to keep writing. Any industry is has gatekeepers,
yeah,
and the only way you're going to appeal to those gatekeepers or reach beyond those gatekeepers is by writing something that appeals to them. And the only way you're going to write something good that appeals to them is by practicing and doing it and doing it again and again. The mistake I see a lot of writers make, there are two, what would I say? There's a, yeah, I could actually qualify this a little bit. So first of all, broadly speaking, just write. How do you write? Um, I've seen a lot of writers who just sit down, particularly with long form stuff, novel, screenplay, what have you, um, just sit down and start writing without necessarily knowing what they're writing. And there are a lot of people out there who'll say, just sit down and start writing it. It will be terrible. Don't worry about it. When you finish, you'll go back to the beginning and you can just rewrite it. I think, Christ, there's nothing more for me. There's nothing more demoralizing than writing. So getting to the end of writing something, which is a lot of work, and it being so bad that you've got to go back and start again. I would hate that. That's not my process. My process is to plan a lot. So I would I would plan what you're going to write, know what you're going to write, and know that it works before you sit down to write it. Get feedback from people, your mates, anybody else you know who's interested in the stuff you're interested in. Write a short outline. One of the things I'm going off on, I will put all of this together in a sensible order in a moment, I promise. First of all, watch or listen to a lot of the thing you're interested in. So if you want to write documentaries, watch lots of documentaries. If you're interested in film, watch lots of film. It's theatre, goes to the theatre a lot. You've got to consume as much of it as you possibly can, so that you see good stuff and bad stuff and start to recognize the difference between the good stuff and the bad stuff. Then write as much as you can. And the way you write as much as you can is you do exactly what I've just said, which is you plan first of all and get feedback, embrace feedback. Feedback's really important. You're only going to get better and you're going to get feedback. You're going to have to, at some point, professionally, get notes from somebody. So learn how to be on the receiving end of notes and embrace them and do something with them. Write short, plan and write short first of all. So one paragraph pitches, one page outlines. This is the point I was going to make. I think are really important because you're going to be asked for those when somebody in a business asks you to pitch an idea. They're not going to ask for a finished screenplay or finished book. They're going to ask for an outline. They're going to say, send me a paragraph about the idea that you're really excited about at the moment, or they're going to say, send me a 2-page treatment. So planning and writing short initially, I think, is really important and really useful. It's a really useful skill to have. Sometimes you might be asked to summarize your story in a short paragraph because it needs to go into a meeting with a load of marketing people and they need to be able to tell them what the story is about. So to be able to summarize your story in a paragraph quickly and easily is a really good skill to have. So start by summarizing your story in a paragraph and then work from there. And then when it comes to writing, you've just got to keep doing it and don't get demoralized. If you write something, if you go through that whole process and you write something and you've written it, that's not the end of the process. That's the beginning. You've now got to do it again with something else. And I'm guilty of this. This is the cycle and the treadmill that all writers find themselves on, because all writers write speculatively as well. As soon as you finish something, you've just got to get it out there, get it read by as many people as you possibly can to get feedback on it and know whether it's any good or not. And you've just got to start working on the next thing. The first question you're going to be asked, if you write something brilliant, that you've written the best play anybody's ever read and you send it to the National Theatre and they love it, and they love it so much they'd really like to produce it, I guarantee you when you walk into the meeting with them and they say, yeah, we read that play and we think it's brilliant, the first thing they're going to say next is, what else have you got? and it's a question people ask all the time of writers. Um, whatever you send them, invariably the first thing they say is, "What else have you got?" So you need a drawer full of more than one thing, and the only way you're going to build that up is by writing as much as you possibly can. I've got I spent a lot of last year pitching. I was very lucky, very fortunate to get the opportunity to do a lot of pitching last year, which can be demoralizing because you're doing a lot of work for no money, in the hope that something gets picked up, and often, most times, it doesn't. But what that means is, at the moment, I've got uh, reams of ideas at various stages, from a paragraph to a sort of 2-page outline. Probably a dozen ideas. They may all be terrible. None of them have been picked up yet, so the chances are that, yeah, they could all be terrible, and nobody will produce any of them. There might be one in there that somebody does at some point. I don't know, but it's useful to have all those ideas in case somebody does ask that question, which invariably they will. I've got something that I can at least grab out of an application, or an electronic drawer, and be able to send to somebody. So just keep writing, and don't be put off by whatever anybody tells you. Just keep doing it. If you're passionate about it and you really want to do it, just keep doing it.
So there you go. Now, this is the point in the interview where you can tell people where they can find you, but don't give away your home address.
On most social media platforms at the moment, really. Threads is the one I'm using the most. It just seems to be, for me, it has the most people on there. There's very few people on there at the moment, I'll be honest with you. And there isn't one of the conversations we keep having on there is that it's hard to get a conversation going, but it just seems to be the nicest place of all of them at the moment. It's good fun. There are some accounts on there that are quite witty to follow. The Channel 4 account on Threads is one of the most amusing accounts on Threads at the moment. So big shout out to whoever's doing that. Brilliant work, excellent work. So yeah, Threads is probably the easiest place to find me. I won't respond to anything on Twitter, not until things seem to improve on that platform. You might find me on Blue Sky. You're unlikely to find me on Mastodon. Sorry about that. And I am on Facebook, but God knows the last time I logged in, so you won't find me on Facebook. Is that
And
right? That was what you meant, wasn't it?
yeah, that is what I meant. Yeah. So there you have it. Another wonderful interview. And I won't keep on doing this in every interview. It's just because I like the idea that rolling a dice and I'm on a roll. It's a terrible analogy because
Yeah, I like dice rolls. Go for it.
if you play D&D, there's like there's multiple different sizes dice. I do have a tin full of them. So whatever size dice you're imagining, imagine it. It works well. Just think it's not in a sinister way, it's in a happy way. But this is my second interview of the year so far. So we're on to a roll of this ever evolving dice. Depends on who you are and what you're thinking about at that moment in time. Hopefully you're not thinking about the toy maker. No, not that he's a bad character. It's just because that's more cynicism than after a jolly approach there. So there we have it. Another wonderful episode of the Niche podcast where we talk about things that are classed as niche. Well, it depends. It depends on what my definition of the word niche is.
Niche is good.
Because obviously we interviewed Gary Russell for the first episode about his involvement in his version of the famous five, because that is classed as niche, but I don't really know the definition of niche. And so there'll be more content from me across all 20 of my YouTube channels and all 13 of the podcasts. And obviously, I am still doing random bits and bobs, so there'll be all sorts coming out of the waterworks as I try to evolve these channels, not make them YouTube channels. So I'm not a YouTuber. I'm sort of a filmmaker, but just on a very low budget, on a low budget of -£4. That's you could probably go lower, but that's as low as I want to go because I'm not great at maths. Because obviously, if we were having a high budget, we wouldn't be making a Doctor Who series where I play all the characters, and half the characters have to be trapped in other places, so it's easier to film, such as the Master trapped in an iPad or the Dream One trapped in my head. when he does come out of my head, he ends up in another room, nowhere near the doctor, and the doctor trapped it in this house, for convenience. So anyway, guys, thank you guys for watching. See more from me anywhere. I'm everywhere. Or if you just want to make it quicker, just type in tommason.uk, all lowercase, no spaces, and you'll find everything there that's organised as neatly as possible. That's if you're lazy, if you don't want a challenge, but if you're lazy. But anyway, guys, thank you guys for watching, and thank you, Ken, for letting me interview you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Tom. It's been really good fun talking to you. Thank you.
And time on to bounce. Bye. Remember, no, I've forgotten.